right, welcome everybody. We are just getting things set up here, letting people filter into the webinar room here. Appreciate y'all joining us. We are live on Zoom and live on Facebook as well. So if you have people that you'd like to join us, you can have them jump over to Facebook too. We'll give people about 1 or 2 more minutes to filter in, and then we'll get moving. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's community table discussion, creating predictable revenue and how to consistently convert leads into paying clients. My name is Ian Campbell. I'm the CEO of Mission Suite, and joining me again today is Dean Isaacs, who's the founder and CEO of Vantage Group. Before we jump in, I want to address a couple housekeeping items again. We'll be taking questions throughout the session today, and we'll be opening up to Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom so that you can make sure that we can address them when they do come up. So this is the third in a series of discussions that Dean and I have scheduled to learn a bit more from his experience and pick his brain a little bit. Dean is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of hands-on business growth, sales, and marketing experience. He works with business-to-business companies across the U.S. that range from startups to the Fortune 500. His passion is helping small and mid-sized businesses achieve their growth goals by developing and implementing high-impact sales, marketing, and growth strategies. I've been fortunate enough to know Dean for about 10 years now, and I've gotten to see his work firsthand from some of the clients that we've shared, and I'm excited to have him on here. So Dean, thanks so much for joining me here again today.
Thanks, Ian. I always appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I know we've got a lot of kind of repeat customers here, but for anybody that hasn't been able to join us in any of our sessions so far, can you kind of share with us a little bit about yourself, give us a bit of your background and experience, and you can go ahead and start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So my company is Vantage Group, as you said. So we're a sales and marketing strategy company. So really what that means is we help clients develop and execute plans that help them generate profitable revenue. You know, generating profitable revenue is important. I see a number of clients that generate revenue and not a lot of profits to go along with that. And unless that's part of the plan, it's not good for business. So, you know, we really do focus on making smart business decisions and making sure that our clients get good ROI for the money they spend.
Absolutely. Yeah, revenue without profit, you know, I mean, you can't really make it up in volume at that point, can you?
That's exactly right.
All right. So let's kind of jump in here with kind of, I mean, I feel like every time that anybody talks about anything in business right now, there's the elephant in the room of COVID, right? And so obviously this has been impacting us for the past 6 months or so. So specific to selling, I'm curious from your perspective, how has this whole situation with COVID-19 and whatnot, from quarantine, everything else, how has it actually impacted selling itself?
Yeah, so great question. You know, I think of it in terms of how buyers are buying and how that's impacting selling, right? And so from that perspective, you know, obviously with the pandemic and work from home, everybody's been affected. Nobody's been able to live for the last 6 months without having some level of impact from COVID. So whether it's their personal situation, family health, emotional, loss of jobs or loss of co-workers around them at their work, everybody's been impacted, right? So that's a huge part of the relationship building piece that we have to understand when we sell, because we're building relationships first. So I'd say high level, we just need to keep that in mind, right? So if we are out to sell and get deals done, we're actually often going to distance ourselves from the opportunity versus thinking about this concept of sell to help. And when you think about sell to help, it's even selling's the misnomer. It's really about how do you help? And coming into these opportunities with this help mindset changes the way we approach our qualifying questions, changes how we build relationships, and even our patience during the sales process too. So I think that's a big piece of it. So if we think about that as how we relate to individuals, if you think about the companies that we're targeting, I've created these sort of three buckets in my mind of how I categorize businesses right now. Survivors, delayers, and thrivers. And so if you think about businesses, where are they at, right? Where are they at in their mode or growth during this crazy pandemic, economic recession times? So obviously survivors are businesses that are just trying to do that, right? They're just trying to stay afloat, keep their core team together. Maybe they've downsized, maybe they've cut budget, maybe they got some PPP money, but it's just a stopgap and they haven't really figured out how to continue to grow revenues. And so the survivors don't care about you as a seller, right? They don't care about your promise. They don't care about the ROI you talk. They don't care. They're just in survival mode. So your goal, if you run across a prospect that's in survival mode, is how can you help them? That's your mindset. What can you do to support them? Maybe it's an introduction to somebody else. Maybe it's a little piece of advice. Maybe it's just stepping back from pushing on that sales process. So survivors are the first category. The second I mentioned was the delayers. So in my mind, delayers are companies that they're in that wait and see mode, right? Again, maybe they got some PPP cash and that's floated them for a period of time. They've probably done some downsizing, but not as significant as the survivors. But they're taking that cautious, waiting for the other shoe to drop, what's going to happen with the election, what's going to happen in their markets. They're just not moving forward very quickly. I would say for the delayers, don't assume they won't buy though. They just may take more time. They may buy in phases. They may just need more convincing that you're credible and you really can do what you say you can do. So I would say that's the thing with delayers is don't assume no, right? Just assume it's going to take a little longer. And then the third category I think about is the thrivers. And these are people that either by luck or by strategy have just taken advantage of the current environment, right? And they've seen benefits of the changes in the economy. They've seen new opportunities. They're investing, they're growing. And so obviously those are the people, in my mind, if I was going to prioritize those and where I was going to spend my time as a seller, I'd want to focus on the thrivers first. They have a higher likelihood of buying sooner. So I think that's for me, the biggest shift in how I think about what's changed from a seller's perspective. I think about the buyer. So hopefully that gives you some sense of sort of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like that what you're talking about is really changing your overall sales strategy and being able to kind of reorganize the people that you're talking to into these different buckets.
Yeah. It's some of it is the qualifying process, right? And I know we'll get into qualifying here in a little bit, but knowing how to categorize and qualify early on is really good. So I'll just give you another quick example. So I've been working with a software company, they're a SaaS company, for the last 6 months, for pretty much the whole of the first 6 months of this year. And their primary verticals they sell into are restaurant, retail, and hospitality. All three of which were at the center of the target when it came to the pandemic. And so certainly when this all hit mid-March, they were just like in freeze mode, like what's going to happen to our market? And even if you just take the restaurant piece of their market, their verticals, we could actually break that into those three sections, right? The survivors, the delayers, and the thrivers. Unfortunately, the mom and pop restaurants, they're in survival mode, right? So they want ideal prospects for my client. The delayers were potentials, but they were sort of kicking the can down the road. But there were some really big brand restaurants, restaurant chains and restaurant franchises that were just taking huge opportunity with the curbside, with digital ordering, people that had already sort of equipped themselves technology-wise. So they were the thrivers within the restaurant vertical. So we focused on them. Why, if you just sort of step back and look at the whole restaurant vertical, you'd say, oh, bad situation. It's actually not the case. So you've got to sort of like dig a little deeper and really qualify a little deeper as well.
Sure. So we got a question from Wes here. He's asking, how will we know which bucket the client might be in at the time that we're speaking with them?
Well, the key there is speaking with them. Right? It's having a conversation, and we'll talk about sort of like the selling process. And I really believe that the selling process is really about having an open two-way dialogue, having a conversation. And so if you can actually have a conversation with a prospect and really seek to understand, try and be empathetic, you'll quickly be able to determine which of those buckets they're in. And of course, if you see their market sector or their industry that's been decimated, you can probably make an educated guess of where they fit. But as I said earlier, every business is a little different. So the goal is just to sell to help, right? Seek to understand and not to sell, and you'll quickly understand where they're at. And you can make a determination of, is this a go, no go, a now or not right now situation.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you're really talking about kind of expanding on the relationship building aspect of selling.
Yeah.
Right. Is that pretty accurate?
It is. And I think that with the survivors and the delayers, relationship building is where it's at right now. Mm-hmm. Right. Some will lead to deals, some won't, but you're going to expand your credibility, expand your market and future opportunities if you focus on relationships first and selling second.
Sure. Excellent. So with all of this, and I guess this conversation kind of can apply in a couple different, or this next question can apply in a couple different ways, both to COVID, times in COVID and not. And I promise we're not going to spend the entirety of this session on COVID, but it can kind of apply to both aspects of this. Just the kind of smaller one of COVID and the more expansive one. But how do we kind of manage our expectations of percentages of lead generation into sales, right? Because we've spent the last couple of times on this talking about lead gen and demand gen and whatnot, and so now of course we've got all these leads, and wherever they are in that whatever bucket they're in or wherever they are in our sales process or nurturing process, how do we kind of manage that expectation that we might have of what we should expect to see and what we actually see?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the numbers have probably changed a little bit because you had this additional dynamic of kind of where are they at in this whole COVID cycle. But generally speaking, you want to have the largest reduction in your funnel from lead to qualified lead. So leads are people that have sort of had some interaction with your brand, have raised their hand, maybe they downloaded a white paper or something. That's a lead, but it's certainly not a qualified lead. So I would expect that you're going to reduce that number of leads to qualified leads by at least 50%, maybe more. And so then you spend time on the balance of 50%, and you want to take those qualified leads to truly qualified opportunities, right? That's where you're having a more extensive conversation. And you may cut that 50% by another 50%, right? So ultimately, you're going to end up dealing with somewhere between 15 and 20% of your total top of funnel into qualified opportunities. And even then, your conversion rates will change, but I would expect your conversion rates from a qualified opportunity, a legitimately qualified opportunity, you should close 50 to 75% of those. Mm-hmm. So out of the 100 in the top of the funnel, you should be getting 15 deals out of that in an ideal world. But there are some other variables that play into this as well.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about qualifying. Let's kind of jump into that section of things. So I guess kind of my first question there: how do we really qualify those leads? What should we be focusing on to find out if a lead is really a deal?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? That's the the $40,000 sales question. How do we qualify? I think it starts with being really clear on what the right deal looks like for your organization, right? What does the perfect opportunity look like, or the right opportunity look like? Understand that. I would also say understand what the right type of client looks like. So right at the beginning of this series, we talked about the ideal client profile. So it's not just the sort of demographics of the business, X size, X industry, X geography, but it's also about the psychographics of the individuals that you'll be working with, the decision makers and business owners. So if you're not really clear with some of those things, and you don't know what the right perfect deal structure looks like, or the right opportunity looks like, you can't qualify against it. So I would say get really clear on that. So in my mind, I always think about the smallest viable market, right? There's a little counterintuitive. I think we talked about this. This is a Seth Godin thing, right? Smallest viable market. So narrow your focus, narrow your messaging, narrow your value and how you deliver value to the smallest, most targeted market you can. And by just doing that alone, you'll increase the quality of your leads and you'll be able to qualify more effectively. So I would say certainly start there. Then I would also say qualifying just around how they buy, why are they buying, what are the outcomes they expect. So a lot of times business owners and buyers of business services and products, they think about the solution. They want to buy the right widget, but they don't necessarily think about the outcome, the ultimate, how do they know they're going to be successful? And so if they can't accurately sort of discuss that and communicate that, and you're not asking the right kinds of questions, you're going to find you're not working with a qualified opportunity. You're going to be out of alignment.
Okay. So speaking of opportunities, so I mean, and kind of leads and opportunities can sometimes be used interchangeably. Should we be, first of all, should we be separating them? And then is there a reason to be qualifying opportunities themselves as sales deals, as and in addition to qualifying those leads as the people?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a lead is a person or organization that has the potential to buy, we need to be able to do what I just described, right? Ideal client profile and all that stuff. Then the opportunity is the actual need. Really dig it into the actual need, the service you're going to provide to solve a business problem. And so that's ultimately the way I tend to think about things is what is the problem they're trying to solve, number one, but more importantly, what are the outcomes they're expecting? Because, you know, as a patient, I'm not the best person to diagnose the right medication, right? That's why I go to the doctor. So as a buyer of services, your prospect probably isn't the most qualified to come up with the right solution.
Right.
We can tell you where it hurts. So you have to be the doctor, right? You have to understand what the pain is and think of it in terms of what their current state is in the business and what are the negative outcomes, the pain associated with that current state. And then as a seller, we want to get them to think about and really articulate this future state. If they could wave the magic wand, no time, no resource barriers, none of that stuff, what does the future look like? And what are the positive business outcomes and positive impacts of being in that future state, solving that problem? If you get them to speak about those two things, you're way ahead of the qualifying process, right? Because you're not focused on the solution. You're focused on where they are and where they want to be. And then you can direct your conversation to this gap in the middle, right? So what do they need to solve that gap, to fill that gap, to solve that problem? And the hope is that your value proposition aligns with the needs that they have. And if they do, you've probably got a qualified opportunity. If they don't, you know, I always think of the first winner in every deal is the first person disqualifies a lead and walks away because they're not a fit. The second winner in the deal is the guy that wins the deal. So I don't mind being the first winner and disqualifying and getting out when I find that my solutions don't solve that problem in that gap. Mm-hmm. So that to me is the fundamentals of really qualifying. Obviously, you need to think about the questions you need to ask and how do you probe, but at a high level, current state, negative impact, future state, positive outcomes, what are their requirements to fill that gap and get in there? You're well on your way to qualifying.
Sure. So you mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned disqualifying as well. So this is something that we talked about a little bit, you know, when we were preparing for this conversation. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of disqualifying and kind of how to go about that, right? I mean,
yeah.
How do you walk away? Like, I mean, there's an opportunity there. How do you walk away from money, even if, you know, and say, no, I'm disqualifying that? What's, can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the first thing is you have to disassociate your personal self-worth with the deal, right? Because we want to sell our stuff, we do a good job, we want to help. But if you can disassociate from that and just be honest and say, you know what, this is what I do well, this is where I bring the most value, where you can drive the most return on investment, however the customer's going to calculate that, and stay there, then it's much easier to walk away. And the thing that I love to do is I want to disqualify. I want to find a way not to work with the client, right? Because what's left are those that I can really do a good job for. But those that I've disqualified, I pride myself, and I know you do too, is making connections with people that can solve that problem. Because then I can extend my value to that client by making that introduction. And that's a win-win-win. So I think that's really important. It's just disconnect from the sort of like connection of self-worth and getting that deal done.
Right.
I will say that I also know that there are some folks on the call probably that are in startup mode, right? And any revenue is good revenue. Be careful what you wish for there. Know what you're getting into. And sometimes you just have to get 1 or 2 clients to have a referable client and a story to tell. Know that going in. And if you know that's part of the situation going in, then you can maybe negotiate on price. You can do some different things to build that testimonial. But I would say the big thing for me is just disconnect from your personal value from the deal.
Right. So how do we know what a bad deal actually looks like?
Experience. Have you had a bad deal before? Have you gone through a client engagement where you're like, yeah, that probably wasn't a good fit?
I don't know what you're talking about. Never done that.
So I was like, that's not, for me, that's, experience is certainly a big part of that. But being really clear on how you deliver value, right? And the kind of, like we've already talked about, who you deliver value to, how you do it, how that aligns with their budget and their spend and their timeline. And if you're really clear on that, it's easier to disqualify. It's easier to find, there are probably going to be more disqualified opportunities than there are highly qualified opportunities. So look inward first, right? Because I think that as salespeople, when we lose a deal, we tend to blame the prospect first, right? They didn't have budget. They didn't. It's us. It begins and ends with us. And so look inward first and really be honest with yourself about what the right kind of opportunity is, the right kind of project, and lead with that. And be honest with the client, right? I think the prospects value your honesty and openness. And there are times where I've said to a client, I'm not sure this is a right fit. Let's just continue to talk for a while.
Right.
And let them know that I'm not trying to sell them anything. I want to make sure they're comfortable and I'm comfortable. And ultimately, if you do that well, and they find that's a good fit, they'll come back to you and say, let's go. They'll self-close in some ways, right? They'll self-select.
Right. So it sounds to me, and we've got a couple questions here that I want to get to, but I heard an associate that I think you and I both know, Dan Levitt, has said to me, and I may have mentioned this in the past, that most business owners think that they have a closing problem. What they actually have is a qualifying problem.
Yeah, right.
And so it sounds to me like that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that if we really know how to qualify those prospects and those deals really, really well, then deals can almost close themselves.
Yeah, which is why you should have a high close rate from that qualified opportunity stage to closed one,
right?
Because all the other stuff should go away, right? I find that some of the deals that don't close, when you hear they're not doing anything, it's me when the sales guy says to me, it's us or nothing or no decision, right? That's never the case.
Right.
There's always some other factor they haven't qualified or haven't understood. Price is always a factor. Dollars and cents are always a factor in a deal. Now, is it the number one factor? No, typically not, right? And then we say, well, if it's not dollars and cents, then it's value. Well, it's not how I perceive or measure value, it's how the prospect measures value. So the money is involved in the decision-making process. We just need to understand where does it fit and who ultimately gets to sign off. Because it's never just us and no decision.
Absolutely. So Eric here asks, and this is, you're going to have to put your psychology hat on here. Why are salespeople so hesitant to disqualify a client?
Fear.
Yeah.
Right. The more deals I have in the funnel, the more my boss is happy. Right. So the sales manager expects this certain volume in the funnel. Right. Ian, you've got to have 5 live deals in the funnel worth $1 million at any one time, or otherwise you won't hit your quarterly quota. Okay. So I pencil whip the system. Right. I put it all in there and I don't disqualify it. So it's the fear, or that can be one scenario. And maybe I'm a little sarcastic there, but it's true, right? If we're measured by funnel volume or funnel value, I'm going to get there, right? If my bonus is associated with it and then my commissions come later, I'm going to hit that number every month.
Right.
That's one. The other is they're not confident in their sales ability, right? If they knew they could close 75% of all the truly qualified deals, where would they spend all their time? just on truly qualified deals. And they would be happy to kick those other ones out of the funnel or hand them to the junior sales rep or somebody else or your biggest competitor in the business. Give them away. But they're truly not confident about predictably closing deals that are truly qualified. And so they talk to everybody. I would say the third thing is salespeople will talk to anybody, generalizing, that will talk to them.
Sure.
So if I have a prospect that every time I pick up the phone, they say, hey, Dean, how's it going? How are the kids? And we have a great chat. And I spend 30 minutes just BSing with them. I'm going to keep them around to talk to, just to feel like I'm productive.
Sure.
Right. And it's not a qualified deal that will probably ever close. So there's lots of reasons why.
Right.
But ultimately, it comes down to their belief and their ability to close consistently and move deals through the funnel.
So you mentioned fears for with salespeople, right? And kind of that idea that the manager says you've got to have 5 deals in the funnel. Never mind the fact that your closing ratio is 2%, right? But as long as you have that in the funnel, we'll pay you off. But exactly, check the box, right? But what about with a business owner, someone who doesn't have a manager who's saying, you've got to have 5 deals in the funnel, 10 deals in the funnel. How do you, so what's, because obviously it's the same type of head trash, right? But but I feel like with a salesperson, it's easier to have that conversation with your sales manager. Would you rather have me 5 deals in the funnel worth $1 million or 2 deals in the funnel worth, $500,000 that are 20% more likely to close?
Right.
You can't have that conversation with yourself really, because you're fighting with your head trash.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny because it's like the trap of the business owner entrepreneur, right? Functioning in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And so all entrepreneurs, all business owners, all executives should have a group around them that they can lean on, right? A peer group like a Tab or a Vistage or just a peer advisory group of some kind or whatever it is. And so you can create your own accountability in your sort of business or social network. I think that's really, really important. And then
maybe a group of small business owners all focused on marketing and sales, with a facilitator in place somewhere.
What a concept, right? What a concept. So you can create some accountability for yourself, right? There are very few people that are so disciplined that they create the accountability system themselves and then they execute completely in a vacuum. There are very few people that do that. And I find that those that do that are doing it in one sliver of the business where they get the most joy, the most satisfaction and fulfillment. And for most small business owners, they're in sales only because they own the business. Mm-hmm. They're in marketing only because they own the business. It's like de facto default. It's on you, dude.
Right.
And so if they don't close deals don't get closed. So they're in this sort of like reluctant sales position. They've never been trained to sell. They don't have a sales process that produces predictable results. And so they just keep throwing stuff against the wall. And so it's not, in their mind, it's not disqualified until they go dark. They say no, don't ever call me again, the absolute no.
Right.
So they just keep working them. Or it's just all in the funnel and they don't work any of them because they don't have time.
Sure. So we're getting this is the qualification question seems to be getting some interest here from the group. So I'm going to kind of dive into some questions here. So Ken asks, with the limited face-to-face access to clients, what are some of the best practices that we can use to build qualified opportunities and relationships?
So that to me is a prospecting question more than a selling question, right? If the question is about building opportunities and building relationships, the truth is right now, we talk a lot about social distancing, but I wish we would talk about physical distancing versus social distancing. There's no reason to be socially distanced right now. Physically distanced, sure, 6 feet or more, I get it. But with all the digital technology, webinars, Zoom, Facebook, you name it, there are no reasons to not be socially distanced. So I think if we have to change our mindset there, that we don't have to be isolated in a home office, working 12 hours a day because there's nowhere else to go or nothing else to do. So having said all that, I think that regardless of where your prospect's at in the 3 buckets I talked about, or in their buying cycle, or there's so many unanswered questions right now about business, about the economy, about how to move forward. How can you take your domain of expertise and deliver value to the world? How can you communicate? So what I'm saying, it's all about content. And I know that Mission Suites is doing a great job right now. You've launched a whole content strategy. I see you everywhere, tons of great value. Top of mind, building relationships, expanding your expertise and your reach. So I would say start there. So you're going to cast a wider net, right? And then because this is social media, see who's interacting with your brand, who's commenting, who's liking, who's reposting, and take the time to interact with those people. Thank them for their share. Ask a question of your group or your network online. You'll start to see very quickly those people that want to interact. Now, doesn't mean that all those people are going to buy from you, but it's the beginning of relationship building, expanding your reach, and ultimately qualifying somebody into the funnel. But I would say have a purpose as well. At the highest level, we talked about demand generation versus lead generation in the prior video. So this is kind of like demand generation, right? This is getting your brand out there, showing people a way to solve a problem. The next step is lead generation, which is getting them to raise their hand and say, I'm interested in learning more. So have a process with your content, right? So high level solutions, examples, value building content that leads to maybe, if you want to learn more, download this free white paper on X, right? Now that's lead gen because they have to put in their name and their email address. Now you've got a lead. Now you can interact with that lead in a very automated way or a very personal way, however you want to do it. And you can start to build a relationship, all while never even looking at them on a Zoom screen, right? And that could just be completely digitally, completely facelessly, but you get to move them through this funnel. So if you're in B2B, services, products, I don't care, you have to think about demand gen, lead gen, that content piece, and then having a plan to move them into your sort of communication funnel.
Yeah. Excellent. So Ron asked the question about building rapport and the importance of building rapport with a potential qualified lead. I guess my add-on to that would be, how do you go about doing that in a situation like this, where you can't see the fish on the wall when you step in someone's office, or the pictures of the kids on the back desk or anything like that. So yeah. I mean, obviously it's important. Ron's asking how important that is to make sure that to identify a potential qualified lead, but also I guess I'm adding on, how do you go about doing that in a virtual environment like this?
That's great. Yeah, the old go into the office and look around and see what's on the wall. But, right. I like fishing. You like horses? I like horses.
Exactly. You like ice cream? I can't believe it. What a small world. Right.
Well, the truth of the story is, as much as this may ruffle some feathers, that is an old school approach that's completely transparent, and it feels like sales. It feels like I'm being sold to. In all seriousness, it's just really obvious, right? And so the fact that I can't go into their office and look at the guy on the wall fishing in Yellowstone, it's actually okay, right? It's okay because it makes us as salespeople think about how can we build relationships and establish rapport in a less artificial way. Because everybody rolled up and looked at now it's look at Facebook or look at LinkedIn or look at that kind of stuff. Same thing, right? That's the virtual office. So salespeople tend to want to be liked. And the truth is, the more you strive to be liked, the more you sabotage the sale. Now, if you strive to be seen as an expert in their industry, in their business, and in their problem, you'll establish rapport, trust, and expertise. And guess what? They'll probably like you too. Yeah. They don't have to like you to buy from you. They just have to trust you. So we spend time traditionally trying to be liked, schmoozing, and all this stuff. And that's okay to a point. But if it doesn't establish you as an expert with credibility, then you're just going to be the guy that will always take the phone call because that person likes you as a salesperson, right? Sure. And they're never going to buy from you. So worry less about that old school rapport building. That will come over time, certainly. But spend time demonstrating your expertise as a problem solver in their industry and their business and their problem. And the way you do that is you ask thoughtful, thought-provoking, probing questions. In all seriousness, that's the magic right there. And that goes back to qualifying too, right? What probing questions you are asking that person about the problem, about the outcomes, about the current situation. Because if you can develop almost a portfolio of questions that are really thoughtful and really different, you're going to set yourself apart from the competition, because the competition is going to say, when do you need it? How much money do you have set aside? And who makes the buying decision, right? They're going to go down the BANT road, BANT, right? Buyer authority. I don't care about that stuff. I can't tell you how many times I'm working with a client that never had budget to spend with me.
Sure.
They didn't budget it. They didn't know I was around. They didn't know they had that problem to solve. They didn't budget for it. There is no budget. Now, they found the money to spend because they saw the opportunity, right? So think in terms of establishing yourself as an expert in their industry, their business, and their problem. Don't worry about establishing that personal level rapport to start with.
So relationship.
Maybe controversial, I don't know.
Yeah, right. But so relationships over rapport. Again, it sounds like relationship building is really the key thing here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stu is kind of rounding out the qualification aspect. Stu's asking, how do you qualify in an enterprise sale where there are many decision influencers?
Yeah. So the enterprise sale is the proverbial cat herder, right? We're out there, we're herding cats now. We're trying to figure out who does what and how. So in enterprise selling, probably more than any other market that we're selling into, you have to have a really well-defined sales process. And your goal is to find two key people in the enterprise buying, on the buying side. First is your champion. Start with understanding who your champion is. And that champion is someone that is internal, right, at your client's business, that has a direct impact. They have a direct impact on, or your solution has a direct impact on them, right? It affects their ability to do the job, achieve their bonus, make their boss happy, get the stock score up wherever, whatever the key things are. Your champion has to really understand the problem that you're helping to try and solve. They have to have some kind of influence over gathering those other internal people, right? They probably are not a decision maker, and they're definitely not ultimately going to sign a check in an enterprise environment. So depending on the products or service you're selling, a champion's probably a director level, probably, maybe a VP level, depending. Now you may come in at a manager level, like a user of your service or product, and you have to get up to the champion. But find that champion, understand the characteristics of what a good champion looks like. And then the goal is to understand, with the help of the champion, who the executive buyer is, right? Who's that executive level person that's going to rubber stamp this thing, sign the check, say go, or they're just going to kill it, right? And the beauty is, if you really build your relationship with the champion using the tools I just described, understanding their business, their problem, and how you're going to solve it, understand their role, really get into their world, they will help you navigate this crazy maze of the enterprise. You're never going to do it on your own. So you have to find a champion first. That's really, really important. And then you get to frame up with them what the ideal project looks like. You work with them. You're their consultant, because they want to buy your stuff to solve their problem, right? Make their world better, achieve their goal, whatever the thing is. So you get to work with them. They get to see you as the expert. You get to consult with them to frame up what an ideal project looks like. You get to understand how they buy stuff. You get to explain to them how you sell stuff. How does pricing work? How does implementation look? What are the other key players within the enterprise environment that you need to bring in early so you don't create these objections down the road? So you get to work and team up with this individual. That's really the key to selling in the enterprise, is getting that champion. And you have to sometimes test the champion too, to see if they really have influence to be able to bring in someone. So if you say, we've got to have IT in the next meeting because we're talking about X, if they don't have the leverage to get IT into that meeting, then you get to start to question, is this a champion or just like a cheerleader, right? So I would say that's one of the true keys that often gets missed, is you get to find that point of contact there, but then you have to spread, with the champion's help, throughout the organization, spreading horizontally and spreading vertically within the enterprise.
Right. It's kind of like, I remember when I was early in my career, and I was selling into school districts, and they would do RFPs all the time, right? I mean, you always knew that the one who helped the tech guy write the RFP was the one that was probably going to win the deal.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're talking
Get
about.
in early, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So Wes has a question here. Where in the process should we discuss budget for a project?
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's this whole conversation about talking about money and price, and it makes people uncomfortable. I think I'll start out by saying it kind of does depend a little bit. Who you're dealing with, if you're dealing with a true decision maker, or you're dealing with like the champion, like we talked about in a large enterprise. But I think you have to sort of frame up value first, right? How are they going to measure the success or the outcome? Because it may not be dollars and cents, right? It may be peace of mind. It may be efficiency. It may be ability to scale. It could be any number of things that they're going to measure the success of your deliverable on. So it's not just revenue. So I think you have to have the honest conversation about what that future state looks like and how are they going to measure future state before you can ever talk about budget. Because the truth is that budget, as I said earlier, oftentimes these projects aren't pre-budgeted for. There is no money in the budget. So if you ask, do you have budget for this? Or have you set aside a budget for this? You get that's a closed-ended question. You'll get a no. Or you'll get a yes, but I'm not telling you, right? So you have to talk about this sort of concept of the outcomes and the value first. And then as you've gone through this process of really talking about scope and filling the gap and all the things we've talked about, you've built rapport, you've built trust. And so you can have a conversation about cost. And you can ask, there's a lot of ways to go about this, but the couple of them are, what is your expectation around cost for solving this problem? Mm-hmm. Right? Because you've already said it's worth $1 million, let's say. I'll give you another example. I'm working with a client right now. They do software development, and they've scoped out this project, and they've got this option one and option two. I'll say option one was about 50 grand. Option two was about 160,000. And so the sales engineer is like, yeah, I think we should just show them option number one first, and then we can talk about the other stuff if they want to talk about it. So I said, yeah, I get it. But remember what the buyer said? He said that if we can really do this thing, we can integrate these two tools, we think we can generate about $2 million more a year in revenue. Do you think
$160,000? Not so bad after that.
And so it's not a case of sort of like convincing them about price. It's about talking about their outcomes and the value and aligning the cost to do the work with that value, that outcome. And so when you bring up budget, I think you bring up budget all the time. You talk about it all the time. Maybe not on the first date, maybe not the second date, right? But as you've established rapport and they're asking questions about how you do what you do, a lot of times they'll start to ask, tell me more about how you do what you do and how much does it cost, right? Most people want to know those two things. If they're really interested in working with you, they want to see mission suite. Show me it, right? And how much does it cost? So once you've done the demo and they've seen the price, you've kind of lost all control of the sale. Right? Then it becomes on them. But if you go through this sort of process I've described, the exercise I've described, they will often bring up how much does it cost in some way. And then you get to have a conversation about the cost versus value. And I don't care if they've had it budgeted or not. What I care about is, are they going to spend the money? Right. So that's the other piece is we had a conversation last week and the prospects, I said to the prospect, are you going to be able to wrangle the money for this? That was the exact language I used. A very, very sort of, they were in construction. So I didn't want to be, because I knew they didn't have a budget for it. And he went, yeah, we're going to just charge you against the project anyway, like their customer's project. So there was no budget, but they were going to find the money.
Right.
So I think we have to sort of think about how we think in terms of budget and price and delivering price a little differently than, do you have a budget for this thing? How much do you have to spend? This is what it costs. Because that becomes this sort of binary yes or no dynamic that we don't want to get into.
So I guess looking at that from the other perspective, and so where you're the salesperson or you're the person who's engaging, and they ask you too early or earlier than you feel comfortable, earlier than you feel comfortable having that conversation, right? I mean, or they're asking you, okay, so here's what I need, give me a proposal before you've actually had to cut the time to sit and talk with them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
or before you finish dinner, right? I mean, what do you do then?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think if you've got like an off-the-shelf product that you got a price list, you've got something that's already maybe advertised, then I think that's an easier thing to handle. You can sort of say, well, here's our list price for this widget, but there are some parameters that can adjust that price up or down. Let's talk more about that. That's easier to handle. But if you have a custom solution or a custom service, it's a very, very different conversation. And so that question comes across in a couple of ways, like you described. The first is, what is it going to cost? And honestly, I'll say to them, I don't know enough to give you a price yet, right? If you want a number that you can actually budget on and go to your boss with or go to the bank with, let's spend a little more time talking about it. Does that work for you? Otherwise, I can throw a number against the wall and it'll be a big number that may be wrong. And you have to be a little, I tend to be a little sarcastic, but
Sure.
you do it with a smile on your face and you can get away with it. I think the other thing is when they ask for a proposal, to me, that's a buying signal, right? It's a buying signal. But I'm not willing to just throw proposals out right and left. Mm-hmm. Proposals in my world and a lot of custom solution, custom consultant world takes a lot of time. Because you've got to develop a scope and an outline and a price and all the timeline, all this stuff. And so I will often respond with a question when they say, can you send me a proposal? I'll sometimes just say, a proposal. And I'll just sit quietly for a second. And they'll say, yeah, proposal, I'd like to see this and I'd like to see that. And they start telling you what they want to see.
Right.
And you say, absolutely. You know what? Let's do this. Let me give you kind of an outline of the things that we've talked about that we'll do. And I can give you a ballpark range of price. It's going to be a wide range, but it'll give you a sense of where we're at. That should give you what you need to go to the boss, to whomever. And let's see if that makes some sense to them. If it does, then we'll continue our conversation. And 9 times out of 10, that's enough.
Right.
Right. And so hopefully by that time in the conversation, you've already discussed the general scope. You've already talked about cost, budget, ballparks. You've already had that verbal conversation. That's part of qualifying early as well, right? If your offering is 15 grand, right, give or take, and you talk about that early in the conversation, early enough where you're having an educated, sort of reliable conversation, and you can say, just give you a sense of what we're talking about here. It's probably going to be somewhere between 10 and 20,000 bucks. I know that's a wide range, but it just gives you a sense of that. You'll immediately see the reaction, right? That's like, okay, or holy cow, that's way out of my budget. Great, disqualify and move on, right? Sure. They're not a fit for you. So by the time they get to the point where they want something more tangible, you've already had some of those pre-qualifying questions. But even then, I won't write a proposal. Very rarely, unless it's an absolute clear slam dunk. They know me, they love me, it was a referral, it's happening. Other than that, I usually do just a general scope outline and we discuss a budget range and they get to run it up the flagpole. And then we come back and I'll tell them, look, this is a draft. Mm-hmm. We can adjust scope, we can adjust price. I want to make sure it's a fit for both of us. So let's just be willing to have that conversation as next steps.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. So you've, one of the things that we talked about, again, kind of when we were preparing for this conversation was the idea of conversations with purpose. And you've used the term conversation a number of times. And so it sounds like this is really just all we're talking about here are just a series of individualized conversations that have a meaning behind them. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've talked about in prior webinars, this concept of the buyer's journey. And anybody that knows me knows I talk about this a lot. And the buyer's journey is just our ability to understand how the buyer buys, right? Why they buy, how they buy, the process they go through, how they're going to evaluate, how they're going to assign value, who's involved, all of that stuff. It's the buyer's side of the equation, not the seller's side. And so if we really have truly, if we really understand the typical ideal client profile, all those things, and how they typically buy, then we can map our conversation to those stages. So early on, it's all about, I tend to not use the word qualifying because it's a sales term, but I'll have a discovery meeting with a client. I won't say, let's get on the phone so I can qualify you, right? Nobody wants to be qualified unless they're qualified to win a prize. I don't know.
Sure.
But having a mutual discovery call changes the whole dynamic, right? Because we want to establish this peer-to-peer relationship, not this parent-child, which normally happens, right? We, as a seller, take the child relationship, we give the buyer this parent relationship. It's all about them. What can we do? How can we establish an even playing field? And you do that with a mutual discovery call to see if this even makes sense to continue our conversation. And then you have a thoughtful process that you go through and guide the conversation, have questions already developed, understand the outcomes, explain to the prospect, here's my expectation of today's call, what's your expectation of today's call, so we're aligned. That's how it feels much more like a mutually beneficial conversation than me pushing you through my sales process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. So again, with this idea of conversations with purpose, right? I mean, so everything that has a purpose has some sort of a wrap to it, right? I mean, there's some sort of a conclusion. So, I mean, obviously the ultimate goal is here's the dotted line, sign, or, check the box or whatever. But along the way, when you're getting there, how are we, like, how are we wrapping up? I mean, are there anything that you tend to kind of focus on as far as this is how you should wrap up your conversation? This is the, your kind of your go-to question kind of a deal.
Yeah. I think that I kind of alluded to it a second ago. It's at the beginning of that conversation, mutually establishing what the goals and outcomes are, right? I think that's where we start. And so what happens is the conversation takes these, winding paths. We talk about stuff that's unrelated, and that's fine. But you as a salesperson, your goal is to slowly redirect, bring it back. And especially if there's, a limited amount of time, you can say, 20 minutes left, and we really wanted to get to this today. And you just bring them back. So bring them back to that. That's really important. I think the next thing that's important is we should hopefully know how to sell our stuff, right? We should have a logical sales process that we follow, which is what we're talking about. But on the other side of the coin, your prospects are probably not experts in buying your stuff. They may have Mission Suite's great example, right? So you sell marketing automation and email automation tools. How many of the prospects you speak to are experts in buying marketing and email automation tools?
I'll let you know when I figure out how many of them are experts in actually understanding email marketing automation tools, right?
Exactly. Yeah, right. Totally. So they don't know how to buy your stuff, right? They don't know how to compare you to others. They don't even know if what you do will solve their problem. And so if you can help them understand that, first of all, you need to understand, have they bought that stuff before? And if they haven't, likelihood is they haven't, is that you at the very beginning, you can kind of gently map out the process. So here's usually what happens when I work with new clients, work with new prospects. And you just tell them what the main milestones are. We tend to spend some time in what I call mutual discovery, which is really where we get to know each other. I really understand more about what you're trying to do and your outcomes. And we'll talk about a little about how I might be able to solve those challenges and see if there's a fit there. So that's sort of like our first step. If it feels like there's a good fit, and then you just sort of lay out those 3 or 4 milestones. So there's no fear about the next call with the sales guy from the prospect's perspective. They know what's going on. And sometimes I'll even give the prospect homework, right? I'll actually start to deliver some value to them, let them experience working with me during the sales process. So if there's something that I need from them, and they seem to be pretty engaged in the process, I'll say, what, we're going to meet next Tuesday at 2. If you could do such and such by then, bring that back to me, or do me a favor, think about this thing. We're going to talk about this thing next time. I'd really like your ideas and thoughts about this thing. All of a sudden, they're working with me. They don't have to buy anything, but they're working where they get to see and feel the relationship, because buying is an emotional thing. The old adage, what do they say? You buy based on emotion, you justify based on logic,
Right.
right? I think you actually said that the other week too. The truth is that the emotional piece is all wrapped around the experience they go through when you're working through the selling process. So how can you elevate the experience? How can they feel more value, experience more value? That's one way to do it. So that way you get to establish mutual outcomes for each call, each meeting. There's a logical beginning and end, and you can move them through the process. At any point they drop out, they drop out. We mutually agree and we walk away, and we're friends for later.
Yeah. Excellent. So are there any can't miss questions that you like to focus, that you like to make sure that you hit during these discovery conversations?
Yeah, I think that there's really understanding the current situation and what those negative outcomes and consequences of the current situation are. Then what that future state looks like in their mind. If you remove all those restrictions and barriers, what does that look like? And what is the positive outcomes of being in that state, solving that problem? Getting really clear on that, that's a game changer. Because what happens is they say, I want to buy one of these, and you sell them one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know if that's the right solution, if it adds value, how are they comparing us on price, the competition. So if you just spend some time asking questions around those two things, and again, frame up your question so you're perceived as an expert in their industry, their business, and their problem, you're going to win way more deals than you ever have before, because you're going to disqualify more than you ever have as well.
Right, right. Awesome. Well, this has been a really great conversation. We've actually got like another 3 sections of questions that I have for you to go. So maybe we'll put those on the burner for next time around.
Yeah.
And we can go into like a part 2 of this conversation as well. I think we've got, like I said, we got plenty to work from here.
Yeah.
So, so to wrap up here, if you had one recommendation, one thing to leave our audience with from today's conversation, what would that one thing be?
I think it's have your well thought through sales process and align that with your discovery, current state, future state gap. And then how are you aligning the value you bring to the needs that they have to solve that problem in the gap? That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
If you really understand how they need to solve that problem, how do you align your solution to solving that problem? Current
Awesome.
state, future state, gap filling. That's where it's at.
Yeah, right. That's where we live, right?
That's right.
So yeah, it looks like so Kate is all about a part 2 of this conversation as well. So
Okay, we can do that.
absolutely. So everybody definitely keep an eye out for more here from us. We do that, of course, the community table we do once every month on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. Dean and I have been kicking this thing off here, and it's been a lot of fun. And so, Dean, I appreciate you joining me today. Everyone in our audience, thank you for joining us today as well. We're going to be there. You'll get a recording of the session in a follow-up email as well. So you'll get some stuff from Zoom, and it's going to be on our YouTube channel and whatnot. It's on Facebook. So Dean, thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. A lot of fun. Thanks.
For sure. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Cheers.